So now we're going to get into some best practices for when you're designing for mobile. And you know, the most important thing to think about whenever you're designing anything, we always talk about having a mobile-first approach. But remember that, you know, any project can either gracefully downgrade or progressively enhance an experience depending on which way you're going to go with it. So take that time, look at your analytics. If the majority of your traffic is mobile, which for our clients, the majority of their traffic is, over 50% of it is going to come from mobile devices, then you want to have that mobile-first experience, and that's the thought process that you want to put forward. But if you do happen to have a client that is someone that does have more desktop traffic, you know, don't be afraid to actually do the graceful downgrade. As much as we would prefer to do a progressive enhancement, sometimes, like I said, it does make sense because you do want to speak to your visitors where they're coming from and what they're looking for on their information. So looking specifically at that mobile-first approach, most importantly, you really want to let your content be what outlines your interface. So you want to make sure that things are being stacked in a way that the most important things are up front and the first things they're seeing. You want to remove any additional calls to action or clutter from the design so that what they're getting is straightforward and you're not hindering them getting to it. And you want to make sure that white space is active. White space can either be too much or too little, so you want to make sure that you're being really cautious with the way that you're using it. One of the places this really stands out in our industry is when we look at our profile pages. This is Cincinnati, who is a client that we've done some consulting with. And you'll see here, this is their mobile profile. And they've done a really great job of making sure that it's very clean in design and that most important information is up front. The contact information is shown first, followed by things like that, your rating systems and your hours of operations and your overviews sort of as a secondary piece, making sure you really are focusing on what your visitors want on that mobile experience first. Then when we look at their desktop view, you're going to see here that we have a lot more information being presented. You're now pushing our social media. That map piece moves up a little bit higher on the page, giving you the more nearby information. And we're also encouraging our visitor to share. Those additional calls to action are fine in the desktop area because they're actually enhancing the experience, taking advantage of that larger screen. So the next thing that you want to do is our number 2 here is you want to make sure that you're adjusting the styles and interactions for mobile. One size does not fit all. We really don't want to take things and just have them naturally scale down. You lose the impact and you lose the effect at what you're looking for. Especially with fonts and links that you want people to interact with, you need to remember to stay large with those in your mobile environment. A finger touch is 36 pixels by 36 pixels. That's pretty big and chunky if you think about it. A really big place in what we do is the inspiration that you get out of images. And having an image crop off or simply scale down to a small horizontal really loses impact when you start looking at mobile, and it just doesn't have that same message and that same feel. And you know, right now in web design, one of the things that we really love to do is we love to play with these great little hover effects and animations that occur on our desktops. But if you start putting information into those, when you take it down to your mobile site, your visitors are going to lose out on information and not be able to see what they want to see. So an example here is our Savannah site that we just launched. And if you look here, you can really see that that mobile experience absolutely maintains the same feeling as the digital. Hold on a second. I need to go back. Go back one channel.
There you go.
Sorry, guys.
Second one down.
Sorry, I bumped the wrong button. So here you can see, like I said, large imagery. You can tell by the way that it's cropped. The images have that same effect. The typography is large. It's really easy to read. I'm not having to squint to see it on my mobile device. And when we get down to some of the further ones, you can see even the ratio of the images change, but we don't lose that focal point. Faces stay in that main center area, as well as your focal points don't change. Now when we come down and we move into the desktop, you see that here we have a very similar feel, yet we're still able to really take it in, moving up to that desktop spot. We're able to use that more immersive feel, larger images. As we scale the images and change the ratios here below, we keep that same focal point and feel. So So we talked a little bit about in the analytics that video is really important on mobile and that people do want to see video, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to take a video and just stick it on every page on your website. You really want to make sure that you're making the most of any video content that you have. One of the best places that we see video perform on mobile is in social sharing. Social posts that have video attached to it will almost always outperform a traditional post. But you also want to consider the fact that when you're doing this, your brand messages and things like that need to be something that someone can take in a small amount of time or in a short sort of viewing. So consider the length of your video. Is it so long that someone's not going to have the patience to watch through all of it? And if they're just scrolling through, are they going to get what you're trying to say? Also keeping in mind the idea of sound. Does the video have to have sound, or can you incorporate some text overlays, some ways to include some messaging there without actually having to have the sound so that you keep that main story being told? And lastly, something that's been a little bit surprising in the last little bit, especially on social networks, we're starting to see positive reactions to vertical video versus our traditional horizontal. In our industry, I think a lot of people still really think about that horizontal as being what's first and foremost. But as things like Snapchat and Facebook Live have really started to take a lot of popularity and people are starting to shoot more video in vertical and realize that it actually takes over the screen and has a little bit more of a larger presence on your mobile device, we are starting to see those outperform when we look at them on mobile. And here, if we look at our example is Destination International, where they just launched a brand new brand, and we've done some video work with them where you can see here you've got that great branded imagery, those words kind of overlaying. This video is a little bit longer than what we would traditionally recommend, and so I have kind of segmented it here for the presentation. But it still is a great example of how to use video when you're trying to grab that audience and, like I said, really put that branding message forward on a mobile device. Tip number 4, don't interrupt your user path. Ultimately, when your users are coming to the site, they're looking for content, they're looking for information, and you want to try to remove any of those items that might hinder them or keep them from actually accessing what they want to interact with. Your navigation should speak to the majority of your audience and should be relatively intuitive and easy to understand so that they're not guessing to figure out where what they're looking for might be on the site. If you've done something like form, you want to make it really, really simple. We've all taken time and had to deal with filling in forms on websites, and we know how frustrating that can be. So when you're talking about that mobile experience, make sure that the forms are only the absolute required information, and if you have a way to autofill any information for them already, go ahead and do that. Ad placement can also be a big disruption on mobile. Ads can be bulky, and it can actually take a scroll, possibly 2, to get through ads. You're still going to want advertising on your mobile site, but consider making sure that it doesn't interrupt that editorial content flow, so that the way that the user's coming through the page, it doesn't stop them from finding that information. Refrain from using pop-ups or modals. Yes, that might be a great slick presentation for your photo slideshow or your video on your desktop experience, but when you look at it on a mobile device, it's very difficult to get it to scale properly. It's hard for the user to maneuver around it, and it just sort of interrupts them being able to move forward and interact with the site as they want to. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is actually site speed. This should never be an afterthought when you're working on a digital project. It should always be one of the first things that you're considering. You want to make sure that your pages are optimized and that your load times are light. It's really important that you are taking the time to compress images, that you're looking at your coding and making sure that everything is in its optimal situation for anything on the mobile devices. And Chris, I think you wanted to talk a little bit here about AMP.
Yes, the Accelerated Mobile project came up last year, and that's continued to progress. So AMP, or the Accelerated Mobile project, is an open source collaborative initiative led by Google, but working with a range of other partners, and that provides a toolkit of techniques and tools to develop websites to take advantage of really the code set so that the experience can be as fast, seamless, and immersive as possible on a mobile device. And so there's a whole range of resources there that you can access at this website. They're running road shows, in fact, at the moment across Europe in various cities and up in Asia. And currently those road shows are going to be coming both to North America, Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. So it certainly seems to be of growing importance, and Google has emphasized site speed and particularly utilizing AMP as one critical criteria in terms of search engine rankings on mobile devices. So something to keep an eye on.
And so our fifth tip here is to, really watch the results. A website is never set it and forget it. We lay out the best roadmap we can, we follow best practices, and we make really good decisions as we're going through a project. However, audiences vary from client to client, and experiences will, absolutely be a little bit of adjustment and change the way someone interacts with something. So make sure you're coming back and you're watching those analytics, and you are taking the time to do user testing, A/B testing to see how something's performing. Continue to find the things that your users are looking for and build that content out so that they're not, you're not missing an opportunity to grab somebody or pull them in. And, as you start to learn about your site and the way your users want to work with it, make sure you're coming in and you're taking that time to make those adjustments and overall make improvements on what you're serving from that mobile standpoint. So just a little recap here of sort of the 5 best practices that we went over today. Number 1 is let the content form the interface. So really thinking about that content as being why they're coming to the site and making sure that we're serving it in the right order and giving them what they're looking for. Adjust your styles and your interactions. So take the time to look at it on those mobile devices and make sure that the styling is appropriate and things look the right way. They're easy to read, easy to view. Look at your videos and make sure that you're making the most of that content and that you're using it in the strongest way you can for your clients. Make sure that you haven't put any interruptions or hindering your users to get to the content that they want. So don't interrupt those user paths. And lastly, always watch results and continue to grow and improve your site.
So I just want to give everybody a quick update on a very important initiative we've been working on for some time, which is the Google DMO content program. So this started from search, but it provides a way. It was launched officially. We ran a workshop with Google at the Destinations International Annual Convention in Montreal, and that highlighted a range of techniques and approaches how destinations can review, update, and contribute additional content across the Google ecosystem. So that includes the new Google Trip Guides and destination information. I mentioned the Trips app before, across Google Maps, and also in terms of YouTube, video, etc. So we initially worked with 2 pilot destinations, Branson, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Clearwater in Florida, so thanks very much to them. They're continuing to work as part of the program, but over the last couple of months, about 10 to a dozen additional destinations are moving into the next stage, and in fact, right this week in Bermuda and Discover the Palm Beaches, 2 of the most significant programs to date have been kicked off in terms of actually engaging with the industry to upskill and train and empower them. Reaching out to the local guides community. The Google Local Guides are an important way in which you can help shape content that appears across Google, and then finally, of course, looking at content contributions, content that can be created, including everything from street view to imagery to video, etc., and uploaded. So there's a lot of information that we can share around this, and I know we've reached out to many destinations. That includes a lot of analysis we've been doing. As you've probably seen across your own website, organic search traffic is increasingly challenging to get as users move to the mobile experience. And so please visit our website, look at that information. You can also go to our special website we've set up, Google DMO milespartnership.com/Google DMO program to register your interest and to get additional information. Okay, so now we did indicate 6 best practices. So Jennifer, I know we've already got 2 questions in about maps. So if you want to progress the slide, and by the way, there's that web address that I was indicating. If you could just go back to that one. So again, on the DMO content program, to indicate your interest or to access any of those resources I flagged. So in terms of maps, we've got a question from Sarah. So maps are obviously very important. What are some of your best practices there? And that in fact ties into the 6th best practice we wanted to highlight, which I know, Jennifer, you had some insights on how to handle maps within the mobile experience.
So when you're looking at interactive maps, the big thing there is that maps can be really difficult on mobile. They tend to be hard for users to scroll past. If there's a lot of points on there, it's really difficult for them to click on the pins. Your zoom level can be off, making it really difficult to find exactly where you're at. So first thing you really have to do is determine what is your user's goal on mobile with that map. Do we actually need to give them a map, or is it better to utilize something like giving them the option to go out to get directions and push them to map apps that they're already working with and that are already created as your first option? Another option to look at, is it really something that's more about point of reference so that they have an idea of where something is? So is an image map a little bit better than trying to actually pull in a full interactive map? When you do go to the position of you've determined what your goals are and you really feel that having an interactive map is something that your users should have, you want to look at limiting the number of pins or points of interest so that you're in a nice zoom level and that it's something that a user can actually take in and really view and understand the number of pins. You want to make sure those pins are large. Once again, back to that 36 pixel by 36 pixel point area, so that they can touch on the area they want without mistapping. Any toolbars you're using need to be very simple and clear and easy to click. And you want to make sure that you always give users a way to bypass a map on mobile. Just because we think there needs to be a map, perhaps your users feel that there's a way to access the information without needing to have that map. A great example here is looking at our Michigan site where it was determined that we really did need to have an interactive map. And if you look here, the toolbar is very simple. The zoom level, it makes it really easy for you to see where the points are. You can click on them. There's a way to show the listing and sort of bypass that map view altogether. If you do click on one of those points, it highlights and makes it really easy for you to actually interact and click out to those profile pages to find more information. You'll note, too, the way that this is set up, there's a little bit of a border around that map so that I have a top and a bottom, which makes it easier for me to scroll past it if this is not the information I'm looking for at all.
Thanks very much. So let's dive into the other questions we've got in just the remaining few minutes. So Erin, a question that came in from Anne-Marie. So do we have specific stats on people using mobile, specifically social media on mobile, for travel inspiration? So I replied that the State of the American Traveller is showing around 65 to 70% of leisure travelers using social media or UGC content in their trip planning, primarily images shared by friends and family across sites such as Facebook. Do you have any additional sort of information or context you want to share on that, or anything specific to mobile?
I do. Across all travelers, it's just over a quarter, 26.8%, using social media pre-trip, social media content from family or friends pre-trip, with 40% of millennials saying that. And then once on the trip in destination, across all travelers, it's at 18.3% and 31.4% amongst millennial travelers. And we'll make these specific stats available likely in the report itself, or at least in a blog post.
So those stats Erin, was specifically in terms of people interacting with mobile devices.
That's on mobile, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So the 65 to 70% is across all device types and at all points in the trip planning process. So certainly we've seen that grow remarkably. Erin mentioned the whole sort of term we've coined hyper-informed, and one of the areas of hyper-information is that UGC content and social media content that people are using in trip planning has increased 7- or 8-fold over the last sort of 8 years. And at the same time, other sources of information, more traditional sources like print, are staying up at near record levels. About half of all Americans use print resources. So it's not a substitute, it's just an increasing range and complexity and fragmentation, frankly, of the media landscape. Okay, so Ken asked about white space, and I replied that this could be for you, Jennifer, in terms of additional comments. So I replied on white space as the open, unused, or white space around images, editorial, or other content on the screen. Do you want to add anything more in terms of the importance of white space?
Sure. You know, the thing is that a lot of times, and I would say traditionally in web, the thought is that you want to kind of move things as high up the page as you can and really tighten things up. And overall, what we've seen from the way users sort of interpret that is the more information you try to cram in an area, the harder it is for a viewer to actually take in the information you want them to. So the white space is the areas that we're using to make resting, so that as you're reading through the content, you get a chance to rest from what you're seeing. I always love to go back into old school here and point out the difference between, if you look at a newspaper page that's just got tons of text and everything, it's really hard to find a really important headline. But if you look in an ad that's got like this beautiful picture with 1 or 2 lines, it's really easy to find what the message is. So it's along that same practice. So what we talk about when I referred to active white space, it's not about just putting a lot of space and making something float. It's about having space that has a purpose. It's about having space that's there to give that viewer a little bit of a break from the other information to help guide them down the page.
Very good. And just a final question before we wrap up, and wish everybody a good rest of their day or evening or morning, wherever they are. So, Erin, Gary's asking about the outlook. So the domestic outlook is obviously pretty strong, at least at the moment, in terms of US travelers and a fairly robust economy. But what about international travelers to the US? And I know a term's been bandied around in terms of the Trump slump. Is that a real thing? And what are we seeing in terms of international visitor arrivals and expectations?
Yes, so Commerce released numbers from May of this year, and I think they were down, international arrivals were down, and I shouldn't say because I don't have the number right in my head right now, but it's been published, and they are down year-over-year. I want to say it was 9%, but certainly what they saw in May of this year, the international arrivals to the U.S. Are down. In our own research, so we do our annual The State of the International Traveler study, which we conduct in January of each year. So I don't have data more current than that, but we saw at that time that the U.S. brand overall was having some challenges. However, the good news was that specific destinations within the U.S., we did not see any decrease in how international travelers felt about specific destination brands in the U.S. They were still being rated as highly appealing. But the brand overall certainly had some challenges in certain markets. It wasn't the case across all markets. But we will know more come January when we field our State of the International Traveler Survey again.
Yes, and arguably the most important time to be thinking about your marketing and promotion into international markets to make sure you're maintaining that spend. And people like Los Angeles, Discover Los Angeles, have done some wonderful work in terms of projecting the message that Los Angeles is open and welcoming to international visitors. And I know I was talking to Wendy, who's head of research there. You know, they've seen some strong results, both in terms of reaction and continued strength of visitor arrivals. So let's wrap it up there. So thank you very much to Erin and the whole team at Destination Analyst, to Jennifer. We will be sending out an email tomorrow with the slide deck and the other resources. So this is Chris Adams, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. We look forward to connecting with you very soon. Thank you.